Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to the first Women in Water lecture for 2022. I want to begin by acknowledging that all of us are participating today from traditional territories of First Peoples across the country. Those of us in Saskatoon are gathering today on Treaty 6 territory and traditional homeland of the Métis. We're meeting from different places within and outside Canada to talk about water. Water is the lifeblood of people and societies, connecting us to each other. So wherever you are, please take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous heritage of the lands where we live and work. We pay our respects to the Indigenous ancestors of these lands and waters, reaffirming our relationships with each other and our desires to have productive and positive discussions. Hello, I'm Corinne Schuster-Wallace. I'm a water health researcher here at the University of Saskatchewan. I'm Associate Director of Global Water Futures, and I'm founder of the Women in Water lecture series. The lecture series was conceived in response to the recognition that we need more opportunities to showcase women researchers in water sciences and to provide leadership opportunities for our young professionals. It was also conceived to draw attention to the gendered nature of water and the need to include gender-based analyses in our research. Each of our 5 lectures between January and March this year focuses on a specific water-related theme. Today's structured conversation focuses on transborder collaboration and high mountain waters. Mountain regions around the world are our water towers, essential sources of water for large populations that are under threat from climate change impacts, especially on our glaciers. The Women in Water lecture series is premised on equity, diversity, and inclusion in water, water research, and water solutions. Last year, over 1,000 people from 26 countries registered for the series, and we're delighted to be growing this inclusive community together with your support. So thank you very much. This year, we're planning to launch a Women in Water expert list to develop even more ways to highlight researchers working on gender-related impacts of water. So if you would like to be part of this public-facing expert list, you can indicate your interest by registering for any of the lectures this season, and we'll be in touch with more information in the spring of this year. I'm now going to pass the floor over to Dr. Andrea Rowe, the Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Specialist for the Global Institute for Water Security and for Global Water Futures here at the University of Saskatchewan. Andrea has been instrumental in growing and expanding this lecture series since she started with us last year. And with the support of our new advisory committee, Dr. Helen Bosch, Dr. Lalita Bharadwaj, Dr. Marcus Brinkman, and Dr. Saman Razavi.
Thank you so much, Corinne. And we would like to especially thank all of those of you who have joined us here today. I just would like to go over a few quick housekeeping notes. If you would like to listen in French, you may do so by clicking on the globe-shaped interpretation button on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. In addition, if you would like to use the closed caption feature, you can also do that by pressing CC also on the bottom of your screen. Today's event will be approximately 1 hour in length, and all participants will remain muted during that time. However, we would like to engage you in asking questions of our guests today. And so if you would like to ask a question, please feel free to put it in the chat, and we will leave 10 minutes at the end to pose your questions to our guests and hosts today. In addition, I would also like to take a moment to recognize our sponsors that have made this event possible. The Women in Water lecture series is presented by the Global Water Futures Research Network, the Global Water Futures Young Professionals, with the support of the Global Institute for Water Security, who have all committed resources to make this event possible. In addition, in our virtual audience, I would especially like to thank all of the young professionals that have taken the time to come and attend today's event, and those of us joining from the YP networks at the University of Saskatchewan, Laurier, Waterloo, and McMaster. A particular welcome to you. And so with that, with those housekeeping details out of the way, I would just like to take a moment to introduce our guests and hosts for today. Our host for today will be Erin Nicol. Erin is a PhD candidate working at McMaster University in the Watershed Hydrology Group. Her research is based out of the Yukon Territory, where she examines the influence of climate change-driven vegetation change in tree-line advanced shrubbification and frozen ground status on water cycling and storage in subarctic and alpine regions. Our first guest, Dr. Valentina Radek, is an associate professor in Earth and Ocean and Atmospheric Sciences at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. She obtained her Bachelor of Science in 2004 in Geophysics, Meteorology and Physical Oceanography from Zagreb University in Croatia, and a PhD in Geophysics and Glaciology in 2008 from the University of Fairbanks in Alaska. Her research is focused on quantifying the response of mountain glaciers to climate change on regional and global scales and projecting glacier contributions to regional stream flow and global sea level rise. Welcome, Valentina. And our second guest joining us today from Nepal is Isabella Koziel. Isabella has over 30 years experience in climate, environment, and development, working with NGOs, donors, international organizations, and governments in a variety of leadership positions in policy, program delivery, and research across multiple geographies. Recently, Isabella joined as Deputy Director General of the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, which is a regional organization working to tackle transboundary challenges of the Hindu Kush Himalaya region, including climate change, water scarcity, biodiversity loss, and land ecosystem degradation. Previously, with the International Water Management Institute in Sri Lanka, as Program Director of the CGIAR Research Program on Water, Land, and Ecosystems for 5 years, and prior to that with the UK Department for International Development and International Institute for Environmental Development. Isabella began her career in dryland Tanzania with the Lutheran World Service. So thank you so much to our guests and hosts for joining us today. I know they're going to bring forth a fascinating discussion. And so what we'd like to do is begin by giving our two guests an opportunity to share with you a little bit about their work. And then after they have made their brief presentations, Aaron will launch into a guided conversation. So Valentina, I'll just share the screen here with your slides, and we'll begin with your brief presentation. Everyone can see that there, and I will just advance them as you like.
Thank you, and thank you for the introduction and for inviting me to the event. I'm aware that this is a bit unconventional seminar where I won't be presenting my slides for 45 minutes as I'm used to. Instead, I will present some highlights of my current research for about 7 minutes, and I hope that's fine. So I titled this brief presentation as Contribution of Mountain Glaciers to Stream Flow in the Changing Climate. This topic is part of my long-term research program, which can be more generally described as understanding how mountain glaciers respond to ongoing climate change, and in particular, modeling of future glacier contribution to sea level rise and stream flow. Next slide, please. So I'll start by reminding you why we should care about glaciers and their response to climate change. The future of glaciers matters on multi-scales. Glaciers have been retreating worldwide as a result of global warming. So on a global scale, glacier mass loss is recognized as a substantial contributor to currently observed sea level rise. Mass loss from glaciers other than ice sheets, this is the blue dots in this map on the left, account for about 30% of ongoing sea level rise. Another roughly 30% comes from the mass loss from ice sheets, and the remaining contribution to sea level rise is from thermal expansion of the oceans. Next slide, please. So on a regional and local scale, glacier meltwater presents a significant contribution to seasonal river flow. Glaciers can modify stream flow properties by changing quantity and timing of the stream flow, but can also modify biochemical and biological properties. Next slide, please. So when we are set to model how the glacier mass loss will change in response to climate change, we often consider the following conceptual model. A global climate signal that experiences the change needs to be translated to a local scale signal, which then drives the surface mass balance of a glacier. The mass balance is a difference between glacier mass gain, mainly by snow accumulation, and glacier mass loss, mainly by surface melting. So this surface mass balance needs to be coupled to glacier geometry changes that are also dictated by ice flow. And these coupled processes will determine the mass change and the meltwater production. Next slide. So in the next slide that I'm just waiting to happen, I will briefly focus on this effect of glacier geometry changes on the meltwater runoff. And for this, I will use the following cartoon.
Sorry, Valentina, have I gone too far ahead there or?
No, it's just the next slide. I guess I don't see it on my screen that it's advanced.
Okay, just one moment here. Do you see the full screen?
I see the slide that shows the chart on the left. I don't know if others see, like the title is Modeling Glacier Contribution to Stream Flow, and there is a flow chart on the left. That's what I see.
Okay.
And should be the next slide that shows a little cartoon of a glacier.
Okay, 1 second. I think something's gone wrong with that, so I just try to reshare that.
Excellent. Yes. Okay. So this figure on the right shows a glacier profile, and the colors represent the temperature lapse rate in the atmosphere. And in this plot below, I'll be tracking what is happening to the glacier annual runoff in time. So let's say over many years. So next slide, please. Great. So I'll now introduce a climate warming scenario. So this warming would lead to the glacier thinning, and the larger percent of glacier area will find itself in the warmer environment. This leads to more negative mass balance, and the meltwater runoff is expected to increase, as shown here in this plot with an arrow. Next slide, please. So now moving forward in time, still with the same climate warming scenario, eventually the glacier will lose its low-lying area. That is, the glacier area will shrink. Sorry, one slide back. If you can go back. Yes, great. So now a larger percent of glacier area will be in the cooler environment, which will lead to decreased thinning and ultimately a decrease in glacier runoff. So depending on whether glacier thinning or shrinking dominates, we'll have an increase or decrease of glacier runoff as a response to the climate warming scenario. So next slide, please. Great. With this cartoon in mind, I'd like to show you some results of a study I was a part of several years ago. Here we modeled glacier mass balance and runoff in response to climate scenarios for the 21st century from an ensemble of global climate models. And we ran this model for all glaciers across different regions. So the figure shows projected time series of total glacier volume per region and runoff for each region. In blue line is the normalized volume as an ensemble mean from these 14 global climate models we used. In red line is the ensemble mean glacier runoff, while gray line shows the runoff projection for each individual global climate model. Next slide, great, that's fine. no, the previous one is fine. So we analyzed the trends of runoff for sub-windows of this period for each region. And most regions, as you can see, have overall negative trends of glacier runoff, while some regions shows an increase in runoff in the middle of the century and then decrease in runoff, here showing with these arrows here. The positive trends revealed that overall, more glaciers in the region are experiencing thinning rather than shrinking, while the negative trends reveal that shrinking dominates over thinning. Next slide. So I will zoom a bit closer to home now, so onto the results from Western Canada and US. Here, the glaciers are expected to lose more than 90% of their current volume by the end of the century. So we can expect a dire future for glaciers in this region, but the question is what kind of implications this will have on the local communities, on their water resources. Next slide, please. So to provide a more concrete idea on potential impacts of complete deglaciations, my grad student Sam Anderson and I published recently this study. Here we focused on the province of Alberta, and we developed a methodology to answer the question that is, which communities will be the most impacted in terms of their summer water availability if all glaciers are gone, while climate is assumed to stay the same as of today. So it is a hypothetical climate scenario, but still worth exploring. So the map on the left shows locations of these communities in questions, and in blue dots, these purple dots that are over the Rocky Mountains are locations of today's glaciers. So now moving to the results, first of all, we found that it matters where the community is tapping the water from. Is it from a lake? Is it from a groundwater source? Or is it from a river? And if it is a river source, is it a glacier-fed river or not? So we found that out of communities that tap the water from glacier-fed rivers, the most sensitive to this complete deglaciation, so all glaciers gone in the mountains, are Bighorn Dam, downstream which more than 1 million people live, Lake Louise, and the town of Hinton. So for these communities, the summer stream flow is expected to substantially decrease in summer. And in some cases, the year-to-year variability is expected to increase. So this means that the exchange of extremely high and extremely low summer flows may become a new norm to these communities, and these communities will need to adapt to this. And with this, my time is up, and I thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Valentina. That was great. I apologize for the tech glitches there. And now we will invite Isabella to share her screen, or not to share her screen, to share her presentation, as I just am able to bring her slides up here. Okay.
Thank you, Andrea. Maybe I'll just kick off so we don't lose time. So good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I'm speaking to you from Nepal, from Kathmandu. So it's rather late, my time, but it's great to have this opportunity to speak to you today about what is an extremely important issue to us, which is transboundary collaboration, which lies at the heart of what we do, but in particular to look at what are the implications in terms of the challenges and the opportunities for women in the context of high mountain water. Next slide, please. So I am currently with the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development. We are a regional intergovernmental learning and knowledge center. We work right across the Hindu Kush Himalaya, and we are owned by the 8 countries of the region. So next slide, please. That's from Afghanistan through Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Bhutan, China, and Myanmar. all those countries hold a slice of the Hindu Kush Himalaya within them. And what is quite extraordinary about this region is its huge diversity. But coupled with that, we hold the largest ice mass outside the North and South Pole. And from that enormous ice mass emanate Asia's 10 major river systems, and upon which 1.9 people depend directly. And calculations show that actually it's 3 billion indirectly depend on the water of these rivers. So huge, huge implications, huge, huge issues that we tackle. Next slide, please. And of course, as also mentioned by the previous speaker, this region is being severely hit by climate and environment change. I'm not going to go through all the figures because I'm sure you're all very familiar with them, but what is really quite staggering, that under current emission trends, we stand to lose 2/3 of the volume of the glaciers in this region, which obviously, goes without saying, will have huge implications. But coupled with that, we also have snow-covered areas that are decreasing, snow volumes are decreasing, and we're getting much more variable runoff from the region. And coupled with that, as these are always coupled risks, we have deforestation, land use change, biodiversity loss, which are also affecting factors to do with water recharge. So big impacts on water resources, loss of water storage as ice, which tends to impact those who live closest to the glaciers in the highest altitude areas. But we also have changing flow patterns and changing precipitation patterns. So we're getting this conditions of too much or too little water and huge uncertainty around that. So more floods and more droughts. And we've got slightly varying patterns going from west to east. And there's still a lot of work and science that needs to be done to determine this, but we're projecting that there's going to be increased glacier melt in the Indus River Basin and increased runoff, mainly due to precipitation rather than glacier melt in the Ganges and Brahmaputra. But moving on, what does this all mean? Next slide, please. So as I've just mentioned, we're going to have a much more significant increase in disaster risk. The map on the left-hand side shows how many people are killed and affected at the moment in the region. It's vast. It really is vast. And 1/3 of our disasters are floods, and many of those cross national borders. Estimate 1 billion people at risk. But coupled with that, we've also got loss of access to water resources. Half the springs in our region have dried up or become seasonal. And this is leading to abandonment of agriculture and forced migration to the cities, which also has important social and economic implications. But equally, the mountain springs, which are drying up, also have an important hydrological role in generating stream flow for non-glaciated catchments. So there's a downstream implication as well. Next slide, please. So, of course, what does this mean for women in particular? Women are far more affected by disasters and water insecurity. It's a commonly known fact. There's a whole range of issues that maybe we can cover in our discussion as to why they are more affected by disasters and insecurity. But for one example is that the information does not flow to women first. It tends to flow to the male-headed households. But in terms of water insecurity, increased workloads, longer time to collect water, but this coupled with male outmigration and feminization of agriculture is really enhancing the challenges for women. And of course, this male outmigration without the required policy and institutional change means that women often don't have access to the kind of resources that their husbands would have access to. Obviously, increased vulnerabilities and insecurities of women and children. And we still really don't have enough data. Women are treated as a homogenous class across the mountain areas, but of course there's huge diversity, and policy and institutional responses need to be geared to that diversity. In terms of, but there are opportunities, of course, in the challenges, there are always opportunities, and gender and social relations are in transition. That holds some opportunities. There are increased capacities, new roles for women, feminization of agriculture. Women are leading agricultural production and marketing increasingly. And of course, there are opportunities in resilience building, in responding to the new climate finance streams, new enterprises, green enterprises, and engagement in post-COVID recovery. Next slide, please. And so we are working on a whole set of solutions. As ICIMOD, we work in partnership with our regional governments, as well as other private sector and NGO partners. And I'm going to just run through a few examples that we've been working on. So we've been working on spring rejuvenation in the region. About 20 million people depend on springs for their water, for domestic as well uses, and sometimes for irrigation. About 80% of those who are dependent are women. And so we have been working to rejuvenate these springs, to reduce seasonal water stress and women's drudgery. We've created a protocol which we've shared with some of our governments in these 3 countries to help manage these springshed areas more effectively. In Pakistan, in the Indus River Basin, in the upper catchment, we've had this interesting phenomena where you've had glaciers not receding, but proceeding downwards. And so you've had a movement of the original channels that used to feed the irrigation canals. And so now we have to pump water down from the glacier up into the former irrigation canals. And so we've been introducing these low-cost pumps. They're called hydraulic ram and solar pumps. They're low cost. They can pump a lot of water every day. And this has also enabled women, and we've been working with women in these technologies to continue to irrigate their farmsteads. And we've also been working on various low-cost water solutions, such as rainwater harvesting, providing plastic sheets for irrigation ponds, for minor irrigation and household use, especially to build the resilience for women and save their time and drudgery, which otherwise they would have to spend their time seeking and collecting water from further and further distances. Next slide, please. And finally, when it comes to managing the too much water, the flood situation, so this is a classic cross-border challenge. So generally, we know that floods move from upstream to downstream, and flood forecasting does generally not reach the most vulnerable. It does not, the information does not get to women, so the women are often last to move. So we've been piloting something called community-based flood early warning systems, where we've been heavily involving women as the agents of change and involving and empowering them in these systems at the community level. We've been piloting this between Nepal and India, and enabling communities to manage these risks across borders. and this has now been successfully implemented across 4 countries, including Malawi in Africa taking up this technology. Let me stop there. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you both so much for that overview. I wish we had unlimited time so I could hear more, but please feel free to elaborate on any of the points that you mentioned as we discuss. As I was introduced before, I'm Erin Nichols. I'm a PhD candidate with Mountain Water Futures, and I'm really happy to be here to discuss this with you. I do have a number of questions and some that just came to mind, but just a reminder to the audience to use that Q&A function if any come up, and we'll save the last 10 minutes for audience questions. So just to start off, you know, we're talking here about transboundary collaborations in high mountain water, and you both work with different sizes of communities and communities all over the world. Can you just elaborate a bit on how your work connects communities across borders and what the value and benefit of connecting communities across borders really is, and why it's so crucial in addressing some of these high mountain issues? Anyway, either of you can jump in.
So should I just quickly jump in? So from my perspective, I'm just going to focus in on the flooding issue, but also the water scarcity issue. So as I just mentioned in that last example, the importance of delivering information from the upstream to the downstream, which in our region is either across national borders, but also across regional and provincial borders, is fundamental to saving lives and saving assets. So that is a really important part of connecting communities, and this community-based flood early warning system is aiming to do that. But equally, in terms of water scarcity, whatever happens in the upper reaches of a catchment will affect those downstream communities. And of course, raising awareness of implications downstream is also really important. And of course, we've been trying to work with initiatives such as payments for environmental services. These initiatives still remain challenging, but paying upstream farmers to protect their land, to protect downstream water sources is also really important. We have a long way to go to still make that work effectively. But over to you, Valentina.
Oh, you're still muted there, Valentina. Sorry.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I would say that it's not so much about my work that connects communities, but it's more about the subject of my work. So mountain glaciers and water resources do not care about human-made borders. And in some way, this is similar to the pandemic we are currently in. So when looking for a better understanding of a problem, such as impact of climate change and water resources, or looking for potential solutions, such as water management or mitigation of risk, I always try to keep in mind the importance of transferability of my knowledge or transferability of the discovery that we are making. So in the study I showed you about the impact of the deglaciation of communities in Alberta, what ultimately makes this study useful, I'd say, is how transferable those methods that we used are to other regions in the world. So with that in mind, we really tried our best to make those methods transferable and to make the data and codes publicly available in our publications.
Yeah, I think that's these are both great points and address a wide range of issues. I guess from my perspective as an early career researcher, I do wonder, and I also went to the UN High Mountain Summit, and I was brought up a lot that, you know, as scientists, we collect this data, and then governments need that data, and communities need that data in real time to respond, as Isabella was talking about with floods. Are there any methods that you found to be the most useful in connecting those kind of historical silos of communities and government and trying to improve that communication, or any tools that you found beneficial in connecting communities, but also sharing that information?
Should I let Isabella first or should I jump in?
You can go ahead, Valentina, and then we'll jump back to Isabella.
Okay, so I'll say that I always feel a bit uncomfortable when asked about, how to improve communication with local communities. I'm, as many academics are, an introvert, and as such, we are totally fine with being in our academic bubble, where we do our science and then make our results, data, and codes available through the open access publications, for example. And in one part of me thinks that this way of communicating is good enough. However, I can also see that we can go a bit further than this, especially since we live in the unprecedented times, both with the climate crisis and with the growing public suspicion about science and the expert opinion. A few years ago, I'll just give this example. I took a part in a workshop organized by Kluane First Nation in the Yukon, where they invited researchers and local community members to sit together for 2 full days and have conversations. So the emphasis was on small group discussions, on having lunches and coffees together, and enjoying small trips to a local museum, to a field site, and so on. So I learned a lot about the concerns of these local community members just by having informal one-on-one conversations while, for example, having lunch together or like walking together to a museum. So in this more relaxed environment, where we were not seen only as representatives from different sides, so defending our ways of doing things and potentially resenting other side for not understanding our needs or where we are coming from. So in this more relaxed conversations is where I think through human connection took place. And this connection is, I think, much more transformative than any exchange of facts and data can provide ultimately. So I think what we need, if possible, is more this kind of workshop events, enabling people from different walks of life to connect with each other through exchange of their personal stories.
Okay, let me quickly jump in, Erin. So I've always worked at the interface of research for development because of the kind of organizations I've worked for. So this has always been an absolute key dilemma in the kind of organization that ICIMOD is. Also, we tend to argue that we are not academic, and we're not an academic institution, although we tend to employ a lot of scientists. So there's a lot of thinking going on in this space at the moment. And one of the key parameters that we always have to follow is say, well, if we create a hypothesis, who are we creating it with and for whom, and who is it relevant for? And so we can't engage in just a purely scientific endeavor in the kind of organization that I work for. And so we're moving much more into a position where we co-design, co-develop, and co-create research questions and research activities. And there are huge ethical issues and questions around this as well. In terms of the time that one takes of communities, especially in the region that I work in, where you have highly vulnerable and extremely poor communities. So there's a lot of important questions that we need to be asking ourselves around this. Now, I don't think there are any magic solutions, but I think always making sure that we're clear about what our research is relevant for whom, who's going to benefit. You know, it's not just about publishing a peer-reviewed journal article for us. That article is just the first point along our impact pathway. So we work a lot with theories of change and understanding this piece of research. Where is it going to take us? What kind of policy will it influence? How will it help an institution? Will it influence the way that an investment is made? So that's more how we work in the kind of organization that we are.
Great, thank you so much, both of you, for your inputs there. I did want to circle back to what Isabella was speaking of in the gender inequalities and how this is disproportionately affecting women. And I was just wondering if you can just share your experiences and how working across borders reveals these inequities and gender impacts in mountain regions affecting high water issues. So Valentina, if you want to kick us off.
I guess I'll give a little bit different perspective on this. So today we live in the era of the big data, and we use machine learning models for almost any problem solving in science. So the caveat is that the machine learning models, as well as actually any empirical models for that matter, are only as good as the data they are being fed with. So when it comes to the observations of glacier mass loss, the amount of data is still relatively limited. And it is especially limited in the developing countries. So for example, in Swiss Alps, almost every glacier has been monitored in terms of its mass balance, geometry changes, etc. While, for example, in Himalaya, what Isabella can talk more about, only a handful of glaciers have long-term mass balance observations. So this lack of observations that are needed to calibrate the models of glacier melt means that the models will produce projections with large uncertainties and will have a relatively low credibility. So the use of remote sensing data can indeed fill in some of these gaps in some cases, but not in all cases. So the ground-based observations, which are unfortunately sparse in so many regions, and very often in the regions where poor people live, are still essential in improving our understanding of processes and in order to develop better models.
Great, thanks, Isabella.
Yeah, it's a challenging question actually when you put it in the cross-border perspective, because of course there are huge inequities when it comes to changing water levels, whether it's cross-border or not. And I mean, I would just like to share some of the work so we've been recently looking at how women have been affected by climate change in Nepal, and we're wanting to extend that study across other countries in the region, really to very much to raise the awareness of policymakers. One major issue is that women generally don't get information when there is a risk or a hazard. They will be often the last to get the information. And so they're also responsible for the household assets and the children. So they are often getting the information last, and so also having to carry children. Their clothing is not suitable for wading through water. Most women can't swim. So, you know, the vulnerability is huge when a flood crosses a border. Equally, on the access side, I mean, I've talked about that already, but just in the context of the question of how do you get the inequities across border, or how they exacerbated across borders. Yes, if there's usage of that water upstream, then that will exacerbate women's workload to collect water downstream. And so those are the kinds of inequities that you can see specifically across borders.
Thank you very much. There's so much to discuss here, and I know the YPs are going to stay on after for a while, and they're welcome to. So I look forward to discussing that a bit more. I did want to discuss water management a little bit, and transboundary communication in terms of water management. So how does working across borders create opportunities for better water management, and what can we do to improve that based on your experience? I'll let Valentina go first again.
So water management is, as you probably now know, is not really my area of expertise. So I will provide an answer to this slightly from a different perspective again. So going back to that study of deglaciation in Alberta, the crucial point of information we needed to make in our risk assessment there was to know where the communities tapped the water from. And to my surprise, this kind of data was not readily available in some kind of online database. So instead, my grad student who led the study was collecting the data by directly contacting each of the municipalities. So in my experience, this is not something that we academics are used to doing. We are, used to use the existing large online databases such as historical climate data sets, or we have our own data collected from a fieldwork. So in this case of this deglaciation study, this breaching out of the conventional ways of performing research or collecting data was actually crucial to get the answers to our questions. So I think it is more and more common that the academic research around water resources is becoming, or in a way is forced to become more pragmatic in addressing problems relevant to local users. As I see it, to address the issue of water management in climate crisis, we need to find innovative ways to work together across the traditional discipline boundaries, and especially to bridge these gaps between academic and non-academic worlds. So I think finding ways to bridge these gaps is a true opportunity for us all.
Great, thanks, Isabella. Do you have any thoughts on this? I'm sure you have lots and not enough time, but feel free to.
Yeah, so yeah, I think there are a few areas here that we could touch on. So by default, if you're looking across borders, you're looking at river basin, much wider scale watershed management. So you're moving much more to more of a systems perspective when you do that. So to me, by looking at a larger scale, you're more able, especially in a geography such as the Hindu Kush Himalaya, to resolve some of the deep-rooted causes of why you're getting flooding or droughts, or how you can better design an irrigation system, etc. So that systems perspective, when you're looking across borders, wider scale, is really important, I think, for better management of your water resource. The second one is a little bit different, but I think sharing perspectives, sharing solutions, we do a lot of that because we talk about transboundary risks, and water can be a transboundary risk as well as an opportunity. Learning how to manage that effectively often takes multi-country solution. I've talked about this several times already. What you do upstream affects the downstream. You need two countries working together, and that's a lot of what we do, is trying to bring two countries together to jointly understand what they need to do to better manage that whole water river system. And so that learning multi-country solutions is what will be able to manage your water more sustainably, more effectively in the long term. And also, I think if you're looking across borders, you're better able to understand some of the risks and the opportunities. It's kind of related to my point around looking at it from a systems perspective. So let me stop there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you both. I really want to continue this, but I'll let Andrea chime in here and pose some questions from the audience.
Yes, thank you so much. I hate to interrupt, but we do have two audience questions. And so the first one I'll pose from Christina to you, Isabella, which is congratulations on this initiative. And I would like to ask Isabella if dams in the Indian Himalaya region affect water availability.
I'm probably not the best person to know the specifics of the science on this because of my position. I cover so many things, but my assumption would be that the volume of water flow is so enormous that the dams within the Indian Himalaya will not significantly affect downstream. There are some very contentious issues, though, around the fact that the energy that they generate does not necessarily benefit the local communities, but a lot of that energy may be traded or sent to the cities. So it's not the local communities who've had to give up their land or lose their villages for these dams. They're not necessarily the beneficiaries. Sometimes the levels of compensation are not sufficient. So I think the issue is more about the local community benefits rather than whether they're affecting water flows.
And I think that the last question here I'll give to Louise, and it kind of picks up on that theme for both of you, which is how can we better connect large transboundary extremes and changes such as floods and climate change with local community level impacts? So maybe we'll give each of you a chance to respond there when we close. So Valentina?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think it requires another session held maybe by your series. I was actually thinking about, there was when we were presenting these questions for to think about what might be next theme to focus on, and it's becoming more clear that, and we are already experiencing that the extreme events will become more frequent and intense in the changing climate. So the impact of extreme events such as heat waves and high precipitation events in high mountain environments would be something worth paying more attention to. There is a lot of uncertainty, for example, in modeling precipitation over a complex terrain like mountain terrain. So these challenges would be really worth focusing on if you can maybe provide in your next series.
Yeah, and maybe shall I jump in on that one as well? So so resilience building is really important. We need to ensure that climate finance flows focuses as much on resilience building and adaptation in these contexts as it does on mitigation. Obviously, mitigation is also really important, but we know that the balance between the spend on adaptation and mitigation is not in balance. So more investment in resilience building and adaptation for these communities is really important. Secondly, innovation and technologies. There's been some great work done in Bangladesh on raising houses on plinths, etc., to avoid damage from flooding. So new technologies that reduce the risk to communities from these large extreme events. Things like risk insurance, also really important, compensation to farmers when they lose their crops as a result of a flood, or another really important area as well. So 3 things I think that we need to do more of.
Well, thank you so much for your brilliant answers. And I hate to have to cut the discussion off, but we've reached just about the time for today. And so I would just like to thank everyone who has attended today's event. And a special thank you, of course, to Erin, Isabella, and Valentina for making this such a fascinating discussion that has just flown by. And thank you so much to all of the staff, Laura McFarland, Fred Rybin, who have contributed to today's series, and Yolande Chason and Tony Vespa for providing the interpretation and captioning. We sincerely appreciate all of the effort that it takes to make these 1-hour lectures come together. And if you would like to join us for the next lecture this season, it will be held in 2 weeks' time, January 27th, 2022, where we'll be discussing innovations in watershed management towards better engagement between upstream and downstream voices. So continuing on with this conversation, many of the themes will carry over. With our guests, Dr. Deborah McGregor, Michaela Carriere, and host Leila Belki from Global Water Futures. So please register on the Global Water Futures website, and we look forward to seeing you all again later this month.